Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner. And welcome to this day two movie review as part of my 31 Days of Halloween Horror series. So, we are going to review a movie that I hadn't seen before, at least not all the way through in this particular video. I think it's a good movie to watch around this time of the year, though, of Halloween. And I'm talking about the movie from the mid 90s known as The Craft from 1996, which I have the Scream Factory edition here, so I got the nice screen cover and then the more traditional um, photo there on the beginning. So yeah, lots of special features here, which I have yet to watch, really any of them, but did watch the movie for this review, and yeah, let's just go ahead and get into my thoughts about The Craft from 1996. As I said, I've heard of this movie obviously before people talked about it, but I hadn't seen it for myself before. Added it to my collection about 4 or 5 months ago. So finally watched it for this review video as part of this series. So The Craft is obviously a 1996 American teen supernatural horror film. It was directed by Andrew Fleming, who also directed Bad Dreams from the late 80s. It's based on a screenplay by Peter Filardi and Fleming, and a story by Filardi. Um, so basically, the film is about an outcast of teenage girls, four of them, in a Los Angeles parochial high school, who pursue witchcraft for their own gain and subsequently experience negative repercussions. So that's basically the gist of the movie. So the movie opens and we're introduced to a girl and a family. The girl's Sarah Bailey, a troubled teenager with unusual abilities. She's moved from San Francisco to Los Angeles with her father and her stepmother. At her new school, she forms a friendship with with three other girls, basically known who are outcast girls, and a lot of people have, there's rumors that they're witches and stuff. So she forms a friendship with them. Um, One of the girls is Bonnie Harper, who played by Nev Campbell. She bears burn scars from an auto accident. Nancy Downs lives in a trailer with her mother and abusive stepfather, and Rochelle Zimmerman is a black student who is subjected to racist bullying by a group of popular white girls. The girls worship a powerful deity they call Manon. Sarah becomes attracted to Chris Hooker. Um, Sarah levitates a pencil in class, which Bonnie takes notice of. She asks them to be their fourth in their witches' coven, so to speak. Um, and then when Sarah's harassed by a vagrant with a snake, he is immediately hit by a car. The girls believe that their combined will caused it to happen, which strengthens their bond. It also reveals that Sarah had once committed suicide, or attempted suicide, I should say. So it kind of goes from there. They experiment basically with witchcraft and spells and things, and it kind of turns towards the worst midway through the movie. So that's kind of the gist of the movie. As far as the cast goes, we have Robin Tunney as Sarah Bailey, Farja Balk as Nancy Downs, Nev Campbell as Bonnie Harper, Rachel True as Rochelle Zimmerman, and Skeet Ulrich as Chris Hooker. And obviously, the most notable thing is Nev Campbell and Skeet Ulrich were in two movies in 1996 that more of the fantasy horror realm. Obviously, they were both in Scream that came out later this year. After this movie came out in May, I want to say Scream came out towards the end of 1996. So yeah. Anyway, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for The Craft from 1996. Getting into my thoughts on the movie, having not seen it before until for this review, I thought it was pretty good. It's definitely an entertaining and not boring movie. I have several thoughts about the movie, both pros and cons. So let's just go ahead and get into The Craft. So things that I liked about it are my pros. You got to start with the soundtrack or the music that was used within the movie. Very 90s, very fun and nostalgic. I mean, if you didn't know anything about this movie and you watch it for the first time, you would say instantly 90s. It really helps to keep up the energy of the movie though with the soundtrack and the movie or the music, I should say, that's used. So that's the first thing that really caught me in a positive sense to this movie. Also, I think the performances by the main cast, especially the four female leads, are really solid. I think they're all solid. Specifically, Fairja Balk and Robin Tunney, who are kind of the main leads, the antagonist and protagonist at the end of the day, if you will, of this movie. They're really believable in their roles, and they play their characters well to the benefit of the overall movie. So that was really positive. The movie has a really relatable premise, with the whole idea of these girls being outcasts in school and not really fitting in with the rest of the general school studentry, if you will, or student class. Obviously, um, there's also themes of bullying, rape, racism, and even suicidal tendencies or past trauma that that's gonna resonate with people, obviously, during that time in the mid '90s as much as it does today. So I think there's a lot of themes in this movie that are relevant that a lot of young people could relate to then and can still relate to now. And I dare say, unfortunately, will probably be able to relate to 20 years from now. Um, the fact that viewers can relate to it, it makes it easier to root for the main characters, at least up to a certain point in this movie. It makes the movie very engaging as a result of that as well. So that's definitely very much a positive. The movie I thought overall is entertaining. You know, it's a 90 to 100-minute movie. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I was never bored by it. I thought it was entertaining. It doesn't really drag in any part for me anyway, so that's definitely to the benefit of the movie. I thought the visual and special effects, mostly which are done in the third act, for the time, I think they hold up pretty well for the most part. Not all of them. There's a couple, like when one of the girls' fingers turn into snakes. It's kind of CGI'd and doesn't really hold up all that well. And there's a couple other things too, but it does have some really disturbing and gross images with different insects, roaches, worms, snakes, etc., that are sort of themes within the movie, and I think those effects hold up pretty well yet. Um, I think they're pretty effective, and it also adds to the overall climax in the third act of the movie. Um, I really like the very end of the movie as well, where the girls are kind of figuring out who's got their powers and who doesn't at that point. I'm not going to give away what happens, but basically something happens where some powers are lost by some of the girls and maybe all of the girls. You're not really sure, but there's kind of a last scene in the movie where you find out that um, some powers are lost and some aren't. Not really. It was just a very satisfying and effective ending, where certain characters get their comeuppance, if you want to say, and it really left the movie on a positive note for me. It's kind of what you wanted to see. So, and also my final pros, I think the movie's pretty well paced and it's very 90s stylish fantasy story, and that's the best way I can say it. It's a very stylish and well paced 90s fantasy story, as I said, as I repeat myself again. So yeah, I mean, I there's a lot of pros. There's a lot of things to like about this movie, The Craft. Kind of getting back to the characters. The performances are all really well. We get a little bit of backstory on the characters, maybe not as much as I would have liked. But like Sarah Bailey and Nancy Downs obviously get the most to do in this movie, as well as I also think having the most character development or the most backstory. Um, so getting into some of the cons or the things that bugged me about the movie, really the biggest one, and some people might take exception to this, but in my opinion, and maybe it's because I'm just coming off of watching The Exorcist prior to this movie, so it doesn't really feel like a horror movie to me. I mean, the reason it's considered a horror movie is because of the third act. The first 2/3 of the movie are basically it basically plays out like a teenage drama slash fantasy movie, with those themes as I mentioned, with bullying and racism and all the things that go on in high schools, cliques and being outcast, things like that. There's really not a lot of horror element until the third act of the movie, and even then, they don't go quite as dark as I'd like. I mean, there are a couple characters, a couple people that die in the movie, but not in really a horrific way or anything. Um, I think the horror element's pretty light here in this movie, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something that I noticed that I wasn't necessarily expecting going into this movie. Especially the R rating of this movie. I had to look at the back cover a few times to see this R rating and really kind of do a double take. Wow, it's really an R rated movie because when you watch it, it doesn't feel like an R rated movie. And I've heard that the producers and the director were going for a PG-13 movie, which I think it does come across like that. The reason I guess the MPA made it R was because you have teenagers and young people using witchcraft that caused the death and ultimately demise of a few people in this movie, especially in the third act. So, I don't know if that was a kind of a 1996 thing, if that would still be a reason for it to be an R-rated movie if it were made today. To me, it's definitely not an R-rated horror movie. If you want to say it's a PG-13 horror movie, I would believe that. I tend to think it's more of a PG-13 fantasy slash light horror movie. That's how I would describe it. That's just me. Um, I do feel also like there were some missed opportunities in the third act to go darker, as I mentioned, more horrific. And it just really stays pretty light, even when we get our big fight and our big climax between a couple of the main characters at the end of the movie. I don't know. I just kind of left me wanting a bit more than what I actually got in that third act, that final showdown. Some of the writing in the movie feels a bit forced as well, kind of all over the place, in my opinion. Like the snake guy that shows up at the beginning when they first move into this house and then just randomly shows up on the streets that they're walking like a half hour later. I don't really understand what the point of what I don't really understand what that character's point was of being in the movie, other than the fact I guess it helped bond these girls because they feel like that they were the reason he got run over. That just didn't really work for me. Also, the bigger problem that I have though with the writing is how quickly these girls turn on each other towards the end. For one of the girls making some valid points and having a simple disagreement with them, it just didn't feel natural or realistic to me. Now, I'm sure there's probably girls out there, young girls or girls that were young once, that'll say, no, that's totally realistic. How girls can turn on on their friends or who were their friends that fast. I don't know. I didn't see that in high school. I suppose it's possible, but I would have liked a little bit more. I don't know if there were some deleted scenes that didn't make the movie. I felt that could have been connected a little bit better towards the viewer. It just felt like, I mean, the best example I can give is Rochelle, who's concerned about Sarah, one of the main characters, when she has an attempted rape against her by Chris towards the end of the film, and she's really concerned about her. And the next thing you know, she's teamed up with another character that when they're basically trying to kill Sarah. It just doesn't jive the way that characters just automatically on a dime basically just change like that. So that didn't work for me. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the movie doesn't really flesh out all the main characters as much as I would have liked, or Sarah's family, who were introduced to at the beginning of the movie. Now, her dad and her stepmom aren't really that much of an integral part of the movie, but I could have used a little bit more as far as where she was coming from. You do get a little bit with when it comes to her real mother and kind of her background, and obviously we know that she tried to attempt suicide at one time, but I would say Nev Campbell's character is Bonnie Harper and Rachel True's character is Rochelle Zimmerman. I want a little bit more from those characters, especially Nev Campbell. Now I know this movie came out before Scream, so this wasn't a Sidney Prescott role for her, where she's obviously the main character in Scream. In this movie, she's more of a. I mean, she's one of the four main characters, but it just kind of felt like her character got pushed to the side along with Rachel True's character, and it's really more about Robin Tunney and Farzad Balk at the end, and that's okay. But I just wanted a little bit more. I felt like there could have been a little bit more. That was my final point. I wish Rachel True and Nev Campbell, who I think both gave good performances, but their characters weren't flushed out enough, and I felt like those two performers just didn't have enough to do, and I felt they could have carried more weight in this movie had they been given the opportunity. So yeah, those are kind of my cons for the movie, guys. Overall, I really did enjoy this movie. I'm glad I have the Scream Factory edition. I will watch it again. It's not going to go down as one of my favorite horror movies because this is a horror channel. In part for me, it doesn't really feel like a horror movie. Now again, PG-13 horror movie, sure. I would say more of a teenage, high school teenage fantasy drama, personally. But I understand the witchcraft aspects of it, and I will say to preference that, or I guess to follow up, is I'm not as, how can I put it? I'm not an expert on witchcraft by any means. I do find it interesting, the spells and the bonding of girls and the covens, witches' covens, when it comes to witchcraft. I am fascinated. Well, I don't know if fascinated is right. Where I am interested in some of it, and I will admit I'm not an expert on it. So some that are will probably say they did a really good job in this movie, and that's kind of where the horror elements come in, I guess. I just didn't feel like this was a horror movie watching. Even the third act, where it does get a little bit darker, but to me, it's still more light than it is dark. And it is what it is, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to give a 7.5 out of 10 for The Craft from 1996. I really enjoyed the performances by the four leads. Um, I found the movie entertaining, very stylish '90s, and I really liked the soundtrack, and some of the characters, some of the things that were going on with the visuals towards the end. But like I said, it just didn't feel like a full blown horror movie to me. And this is Brian's Horror Corner. So I'm going to talk from a horror standpoint. So 7.5 out of 10 for me on The Craft from 1996. Go ahead and comment down below if you guys love this movie more than I do, if you're kind of with me, or you even think less of it than I do. Comment down below why not. Please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for this series. And please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of these reviews as well, but also any of the horror content I have coming out in November and December and into next year. So thank you for watching this movie review video as part of my 31 Days of Halloween Horror series. Hope everybody's doing well. Happy October. Stay scared. Bye.